So even though, I mean, I was pressured, I was threatened, gunmen threatened me that, me must watch me back when me I go home because they're going to get me. I said, something, how dare you um, go after a man of the standing of Mr. Spalding? Are you crazy? And I went through a lot, whole heap at the time. I was ostracized, and but I stood my ground. I stood my ground.
Some people write history, some people make history. Lloyd B. Smith, he's done both. Known affectionately as the governor, he's been a fearless journalist, a bold politician, and a community leader who has shaped Western Jamaica's media and public life. But what drives the man behind the headlines? Today on Talk to Miguel, we sit down with none other than Lloyd B. Smith, founder of the Western Mirror, former member of parliament, and a man who has never been afraid to ask the tough questions or to challenge the status quo. From talking to powerful figures in the press to walking the halls of parliament, he's been the center of Jamaica's most pivotal movement. How did a young journalist rise to become one of Montego Bay's most influential voices? What made him trade media for politics and then return? And did he regret it? And after decades of service, what's next for the governor? Stick around because this is the conversation you don't want to miss. Let's start at the beginning. Can we ask, where were you born and what was life like growing up in Montego Bay?
Well, I was born, interestingly, at what was then known as the St. James Hospital, which was located along what was then known as Gloucester Avenue, which is now the Jimmy Cliff Boulevard.
Okay.
There's that piece of land just opposite Hotel 39, the former Wexford Court Hotel, which is now called the Old Hospital Park, because that was where the hospital was.
Yeah, that's where I had my appendix out.
Right.
Yes.
And that was where I entered the world, well, many decades ago.
So, where was your residence?
At that time, my parents lived in Mount Salem, which is just, it's a hilly area overlooking Montego Bay. It's one of those well-known communities in Montego Bay, Mount Salem, and it's still there. It has gone through many volatile experiences,
Yeah.
but that was where, because my birth certificate does indicate that is where
Okay.
I was domiciled at the time when I was born.
So what was life like for you as a child growing up in?
It was challenging but adventurous. Um, I didn't live long in Mount Salem. My father worked on the sugar plantation, Barnet Estates, and as a foreman. And so he got a house, compliments of the Carjars who owned the Barnet Estate. So we relocated to an area called Fairfield, and that was where I first experienced living, shall I say, a reasonably good life.
How old are you at that?
I would have been about 5, 6, thereabouts. Interestingly, in terms of my own existence, one of the things that stands out in my memory, because I frankly can't remember much about living in Mount Salem, but when I was living at Fairfield, Barnet Estates, it was in 1951, was it, when we had that major hurricane, Hurricane
51
Charlie,
storm, yeah.
51 storm.
Yeah.
And um, I'm planning to write my memoirs, and that is where life for me really began, because I can remember distinctly the Hurricane Charlie. Those days we call it breeze blow.
Yeah.
And we were living close to the Barnet River. And I can remember the Barnet River overflowing its banks. And there was this little gazebo that we used to go and sit in and play, and it was totally washed away. And it was quite a horrifying experience. But outside of that, we had a lot of fun growing up as kids. Incidentally, I was one of a set of twins, you know.
I didn't know that.
Yes, he's now deceased. I had a twin brother, so I always had company,
Mm.
you know, and life was good. I mean, we weren't rich or anything like that, but we lived well. We were well fed and cared for, and my mother was a stickler for discipline and
Oh yeah.
that sort of thing,
Mm.
and very religiously inclined. So we grew up fearing God and learning certain values which have
Would you
stuck with me up to this
yeah.
day.
Would you say that influence your growing up? The church upbringing.
Yes, it did. It did. One of the things that I treasure fiercely is my integrity. And integrity has to do with being honest, being forthright, and not subjecting yourself to be in any way influenced by anything that may compromise
Mhm.
your worth as a human being and as a citizen. And my mother was very, very insistent about that. She worked with some of the more wealthy residents at the time in Montego Bay as a cook.
Mhm.
And she was a very good cook, and we were the beneficiaries of that as well. And she saw how they lived, and she said to herself, although she would not have had all the monetary resources, she would go out of her way to make sure that we lived a good life. So we were well fed, well clothed,
Yeah.
and of course, she insisted on us growing up with a Christian influence, which has stayed with me up to this day. I remember distinctly too that uh, across from where we lived was this um, property called Cromarty, which is still there, and it was owned by this famous British publisher and baron and all sorts of things, Lord Beaverbrook. And at Christmas time, we would be invited up to Lord Beaverbrook's house. As kids, we were treated, and I can always remember we used to sing a song called "Oh Green You Are, Oh Green You Are." I don't know the rest of it, but but we always looked forward to that.
Okay.
And so we stayed there. Um, I had a half sister. She's still alive, lucky her, because she's older than me. And she met in an accident along the same main road. We were close to the main road,
Mm.
which is now known as the Tucker Irwin Main Road,
Yes.
Fairfield Road. And she was hit down by a man who apparently had had too much to drink. She survived, and I didn't know until later on this side of the story that my parents were able to be sufficiently compensated
Okay.
financially because he was wrong.
Mm.
And I was later to be told that that money my parents used to buy a piece of land in another area of St. James called Irwin
Yeah.
District, and set about to build a home for themselves because where we lived was Barnet property.
Mm.
And so eventually we relocated to this new home in Irvine. It was a nice little cottage, and we felt very happy living there. And that's where I would have lived until when I became, as what would I say, a young adult and went off on my own, so to speak. Mhm.
So, did you always know you wanted to be a journalist, or was there something else you had in mind, you had considered?
At the very outset, I had wanted to be a teacher. And in fact, that was so ingrained in me that I used to teach the bushes and the trees and give them some beating to you see. Um, um, and I used to get the piece of chalk and cross up. I was flogged for that actually, but I had this thing about becoming a teacher. And incidentally, I did become a teacher.
Okay.
Yes, and so how I segued into journalism is I had got a scholarship, but that was then known as the common entrance,
Yeah, did that
and
myself.
and we call it scholarship. And I got a scholarship to go to Cornell College. And at that time, for a little boy living in a district where I was, getting to go to Cornell was a big thing.
Yeah.
I think there were only two other youngsters in the entire community that were in a similar situation, and they were from a more privileged background. So here was this poor little boy and going to Cornwall. It was a big thing. So I went to Cornwall, and I, while I was at Cornwall, I discovered that I had this tremendous interest in writing. I was always writing. I would write poems for they were done magazine, a school magazine called the Cornwallian. And then at one stage, I even won a poetry contest in the Jamaica Festival Literary Competition. And then what made it even more interesting for me, there was an all island essay competition, and I entered it and I won. And the main prize was a weekend at Half Moon Hotel. Now you can really imagine a poor little boy like me ending up Half Moon. It was a fantastic experience. So all of that sort of made me become more and more interested in writing, journalism. Now, when we reached, I think it was fourth form in those days, yeah, fourth form, there was usually a conversation with you and the school as to what profession you want to choose. So by that time now, I had become so excited about writing, and I was following the news, and there was another student at Cornell College. He was a bit ahead of me, and he was doing some work at the time for the Gleanor, and I became very fascinated with this whole business, writing. And so when I was asked, so Lloyd, what is it you want to do after you leave college, etc., etc.? And I said I want to be a journalist, and there was a deathly silence. And then the the schoolmaster said, "Why would you want to be a journalist?" Because you see, in those days, doctor, lawyer, teacher, nurse, those were the
It
things.
wasn't considered a traditional
Yeah.
thing for a young
Journalist? Are you crazy? And I felt terrible. I felt maybe, did I make a wrong decision? Anyway, just about that time I was in sixth form, and eventually, and the Anglican Church decided to establish a new teachers' college in Mandeville. And they went on an all island recruitment exercise to select a number of students from the more prominent high schools to be the pioneer students. And they came to Cornwall. I think it was Bishop Benjamin Vaughan at the time and some other bigwigs in the Anglican Church. And they made this wonderful speech about being trained as a teacher. And of course, after having felt so let down when I had said I wanted to be a journalist and I didn't get the sort of response that I was hoping, I said, no, let me try this thing. Also, it was adventurous for me because going to college would mean leaving home and going into a brand new environment in Mandeville that I'd never been before, and so on and so forth. So I jumped at it and applied. And I'll never forget, I'd never been to Mandeville before. Now there's this country bus called the Confidence that would leave from Montego Bay to Mandeville, and it would pass by where I live in Irvine because it would go through that area of St. James and then end up in Trelawney and then end up in Manchester.
Mm.
So I had to wake up from about 4 o'clock because the bus would reach where I live about 5 or sometime after 5. At that time, we didn't have electricity, so my mother had to wake me up early and trim the home sweet home lamp and give me a cup of tea with some bread and butter. And of course, she prayed, and I'll never forget, she said, take the 121 Psalm with you. And I must tell you that even to today, that Psalm means
It's still
a
with you.
lot to me,
Yeah.
a great deal. Psalm 121. And so she packed me up nicely and prayed for me. And in those days, we weren't afraid of gunmen, just dopey.
Yeah. Yeah, you didn't have gunmen those
So
times.
ghosts. So um, we waited until we could hear when the bus is coming from quite a distance.
Yeah.
The driver knew that people would be waiting, but they would have to be alerted. So when we heard the horns blowing about a mile away, because we lived on a hill, we trekked down, and she walked with the tilly lamp to find our way down in the dark. And so I went on this bus to Mandeville. It was quite an experience. I mean, the bus driver was a rum drinker. So every now and again, he would stop at the nearest shop or bar to take a taste, he says.
Spiritual.
I don't know, but we made it to Mandeville. But sometimes when I would look outside the bus window, it's a precipice. I mean, it was a treacherous route. Anyway, we reached Mandeville, and I went and did the interview, and the rest is history. I was accepted at the college. That was 60 years ago. Because the college was started in 1965. Am I correct there? Yes.
Yeah, that was 60 years.
And so it was a fantastic experience when I was at college. But while being at college now, this whole business of writing resurfaced. In fact, I did English and Spanish and music. Um, but English was my main specialty. As a matter of fact, I was known for a man of many words because between you and me, I used to study the dictionary, you know. So a lot of times when I was in any situation that I needed to come out of, I would just use a lot of big words and befuddle my people.
Very eloquent.
So I became an excellent debater and so on and so forth. And then at some point, you know, even when I was at college, I started sending articles to the Gleanor, and they were published. So I said, wait, you know. So here it is now, battling between teaching and journalism. And interestingly, when I was at college, I, along with a very good friend of mine, he also was a Cornwallian, he's now dead, unfortunately, we decided to start a college newspaper.
Okay.
And we gave it the name the Minizine, because we say, all right, you have magazine, so we're going to have a Minizine.
That sounds very original.
Yes.
Yeah.
And incidentally, it's still being published at college now. Just the other day, I was told that it has been revived by the student body. But anyway, so here we are now. I now had a newspaper, the Minizine. And in those days, now we never have laptop and all them sort of thing and desktop. I don't know if you know, remember the days of Gestetner machine where you would type the thing onto this whatever, and then you had to put it on the thing and roll it and for it to print off. Very
I know of
ancient.
it, but I've
It
seen
was
of it.
very ancient,
Yeah.
and we would sell it. I can't remember how much we sell the paper for, but it wasn't much. Anyway, but there it was. That was my baptism into journalism because now I had my own little newspaper. And we even got into trouble at one point where my colleague wrote, we had a little gossip column, and he wrote something in there that was deemed to be libelous about another student. And we were brought into the principal's office. It was Ken Jones, he was a Welshman, and he was livid, because my colleague now said was pretending because the article was written under a pseudonym, pen name. So he didn't want to disclose that it was him. And I'll never forget the principal slammed his hand and said, Mr. Reed, did you write that article or did you not? And there was this deathly silence. And then eventually he said, yes, I did. When he said, yes, I did, I said, all I could think of at that point was, here ends my college career, because we must go and get expelled now. But we were just punished in other ways. I think we couldn't go off campus for a while. And so that was my baptism into journalism because, libel forms a very
Yes.
adverse
Yeah,
part of
yeah,
being
yeah.
a
Wicked.
journalist,
Yeah.
which I was to experience later on. So here it was now that I have this twin affection thing, journalism,
And
teaching.
teaching.
After I graduated from college, I taught for a while, for quite a few years. I taught at a number of schools, and then some very prominent schools. I taught St. George's College, Homewood, Frankfield. I was all over the place. I was young and adventurous. I wanted experience. But during all that time, wherever I went, I would become a news correspondent
Okay.
for the Gleanor or RJR. So there was this, you know, mixture of journalism, teaching. And then eventually I was in Kingston at the time and I was principal for a private school. It was Oxford Preparatory School. I was the principal. And just next door to the school was a publishing house. And one day when I was reading the papers, I saw where this publishing house was looking for an editor. Because, I'm greatly interested in writing. And I said, I'm going to apply. So I did apply. I remember I just walked across from my office to their office, because Norwood Avenue, part of Kingston. It was off Oxford Road. I don't know if you know that here
Yeah,
quite
I know
well.
that area.
Pegasus, yeah, the road. And I went. Mike Henry, who is a well-known politician,
Yeah.
he was the owner of the publishing house. It was called Kingston Publishers. He had actually bought out McGraw Hill, a well-known publisher, international publisher at the time, and it had changed the name to West Kingston Publishers Limited. And I was interviewed, and I got the job to be editor. So that was when I left
Teaching.
teaching. Um, it was quite an experience being an editor because now I would be editing books, and I did do quite a lot of work there. For example, I have the distinction of editing the first two books on national heroes, Sir Alexander Bustamante. One of them was Bustamante and his letters by a very distinguished journalist at the time, Frank Hill, and the other was um, Bustamante and Modern Jamaica by, he's now deceased as well, Professor, oh no, the name's at the moment, but he was a very distinguished academician. And I did both those, edited both those books, and a lot of other books. I worked with people like Dr. Henry Lowe at the time, who was at what was then known as CAST and now UTEC. He had a very well-known series of books at the time called Science Adventure, and I edited. I was editing all kinds of books all over the place, and that gave me a lot of experience in the whole business of publishing and writing and so on and so forth. So I was quite happy in that area. And then Mike Henry decided that he was going into politics. And so he calls me into his office one day and said, Lloyd, I'm going into politics. And I want you to think about assisting me. You could be my public relations man. Now, at that time, I had no interest in politics at all. Because you remember now, at that time, a lot of violence. Because we're now talking about the 70s, you know.
79.
Yes, remember them 70s, they, Manly and this whole thing about communist boogie and all that. I said, what me go do this? I thought it over. I thought it over. And I said, no, I don't. Because I would be targeted. And in fact, I left, I resigned. The Gleanor advertised for a sub editor.
Yeah.
And the editor at the time was the well known, I don't know his name, you know, but it will come back eventually. He wanted me to come and work at the Gleanor. So Hector Winter, I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he was a very outstanding man in his time. Senate Minister of Education at one stage and editor of the Gleanor during that turbulent period. The time, if you remember, when Manley marched on the Gleanor and said, next time.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, and Mike himself at the time, I mean, after I left, they set fire to the office where I was. Politics, you know. And Mike himself got shot at some point. He still has a bullet in his body up to this day. So I thought I made the right decision at the time. So I ended up at the Gleanor now as sub editor. Enjoyed the experience, and I was there for a while. And after a while, I sort of felt, I wouldn't say bored, but the pay wasn't so fantastic. And I said to myself, boy, I don't know if I can survive on this salary. One of the downsides of journalism in Jamaica is that journalists are not well paid, you know. Yeah. So, and I was a young man, I had ambitions. I wanted to own a vehicle, I wanted to get married and settle down. But with that type of salary, I said, how the hell am I going to do it? So while I was there, and then it was in the middle of the upheavals at the time, the 70s coming close to 80s, when, you know, violence and everything.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I was put in charge of editing all the political articles coming in. And I remember there were 2 pictures that came in that I had to put on a page, one with Siaga, one with Manley. And the way in which I positioned the pictures, it was felt that it could suggest psychologically that Manley was about to destroy Siaga. Something like that, I can't remember. Anyway, the long and short of it is that I felt very uncomfortable because I was being put under a lot of pressure. And so I decided that I'm going to leave. And there was the Jamaica Teachers Association at the time. They had a company called Teachers Book Center, which sold books naturally, and Jamaica Publishing House. They were twinned, and they offered me a job. So I left the Gleanor at that point. Um, at the time, I became very famous because it was said that never in the history has it ever been known for someone to resign via telegram.
Nowadays, that would be WhatsApp.
I actually sent in my resignation by telegram. You know what a telegram
Yeah,
is?
Telegram.
Anyway, so I was at Teachers Book Center now and doing quite well. And then the directors of Teachers Book Center and Jamaica Publishing House say they're having a retreat in Montego Bay. Now, I never did tell them at first that I was from Montego Bay. But anyway, they eventually found out. And they invited me to come down. I couldn't go to the meeting, but they said, why don't you come down and look around and so on and so forth? Because that time they had a nice bookstore in Montego Bay. One was in Savannah, one was in Brownstown. And I came and looked around, and of course I was happy to be back in my hometown. And then eventually I left back for Kingston, drove back to Kingston. And I remember, I'll never forget that fateful day I was on the campus of the university. Because there was a friend of mine who was interested in horses, and he had got some horse that was retired from Caymanas Park. He didn't have anywhere to raise the horse. So, Buey campus big, with whole heap of space, especially in that time. So he had the horse up there. So he invited me up there to come, why don't come and even get a rider for the horse. So while I am there, I get this call. In those days you had this thing, what you call it again, the CB system, whatever it is, with the long pole and
Yes, the
the
CB radio.
And the directors, well, one of them in charge, the chairman, said, you are to pack up and come to Montego Bay as quickly as you can because we are going to appoint you the regional manager to be in charge of these 3 stores, Sav, Montego Bay, Brownstown. Now, at first, I balked at the idea, but then I said to myself, but no, I will be coming back home. So I came. I said, I don't have nowhere to live because maybe they thought because I was from Montego Bay, but could go live with my mother again. So they said, okay. So I ended up living in a hotel for quite a while, which I didn't mind at all.
Oh, that was
It was not my expense. And so while I'm at this post, this job as the regional manager, again the journalist in me came to the fore. And there was this little community newspaper called The Beacon. So I said, why not? So I approached the editor. It was a Carol O'Reilly at the time. And I said, I would like to write a column, but I am fully employed, so I can't use my name. So I came up with the name The Republican. And I started to write in The Beacon. My articles were very, very controversial. I mean, the politicians got furious. They wanted to know who was this Republican. Eventually, and I won't call his name because we became very good friends afterwards, but I think he betrayed me because I think he must have pinched a certain politician and told the politician, Lloyd B. Smith is the Republican. Because I was upsetting everybody at the time and I took on some serious issues. Well, I was at the office one day. It was on St. James Street, just across, opposite the courts building there upstairs. And I'm there at my desk, and all of a sudden, in comes 3 of the directors from Kingston. They flew down. In those days, we had what? Trans Jamaica.
Trans Jamaica, yeah.
They didn't tell me they were coming. They just barged in on me. And the long and short of it, they said, Lloyd, we understand that you are a main contributor in this Beacon newspaper. As a Republican, you're upsetting a lot of the business people and the whatever. You. And you will have to cease writing the column or you will have to resign your post. Me don't know what getting at me. It must have been useful exuberance or what, I don't know, but I was so furious because by that time now, I didn't see any reason because there was no conflict of interest. So I said, no, I'm not going to give up my writing because I've always wanted to write and this is an opportunity. It's my hometown and I have a commitment. The long and short of it, I resigned, not knowing where I'm going to get another job. So here I am now, end up living back with my mother in Irvine, and still writing the Republican article. They paid me a little money, but it wasn't much. And one day, Carol O'Reilly, who was the editor of the Beacon, she invited me to a cocktail party. So I went. I think she liked me. A white woman, but she seemed to have liked me. So while at the cocktail party, me and she end up dancing, man, having a grand time. And then she looked me straight in the eyes and said, Lloyd, we need an editor for the Beacon. I said, really? But this time Byron Balfour, who was well known at the time, top journalist for the Gleanor, and he was the editor. But she said, no, we are not happy with him because he's using the paper. What happened is that what Byron would have done at the time is he would pack up the paper with just news and pictures relating to the tourism sector.
Okay.
And so the local people were turned off. Because when they pick up the paper, all they're seeing is cocktail pictures, white people climbing glass, blah, blah, blah. So they weren't buying the paper. And she said they were losing out. And it was a very turbulent time at that time, because that was now in 78, 79, that period, just before the 80 election. And very turbulent time. So I didn't have a job. So I said, yes. Now, just for a moment, that pivotal moment, from that moment, and here I am now. You see what I'm saying? So I never did believe in destiny, but when I look back at the whole experience, I came to Montego Bay Teachers Work Center to manage their affairs. They threatened to fire me, so I resigned. And that threw me right into the Beacon. And it was out of the ashes of the Beacon that the Western Mirror, which I now operate, was born.
Can you go back a second? Would you say, who were your mentors or role models that influenced your journey in media or public life? Do you have any mentors or?
Yes, I had a few. We had people like their names. Some of the names slip me at the moment, but I even the same Byron Balfour, although we became sort of decent because we were very good friends up to that point in time. As a matter of fact, I remember um, when when the when they fired him because he was fired and he realized that I had got the job. He was furious because we were good friends. But then the Beacon was going under. My office was a little, almost looked like an outhouse. And the building, coming back to answer your question, was very rickety. So much so that in those days, remember it's typewriter we used. And when I punched the key, the building would vibrate with
That's going back a bit.
And I'll never forget the first day I went in there and sat down to start editing and be in charge of the paper. Byron came in and cleared his desk and took out everything, and all I had left looking at, staring at, was the old Smith's Corona typewriter. Anyway, I survived. But as I said, I wouldn't, I was inspired by a lot of people, not necessarily directly related to journalism. But in terms of journalism, Hector Winter at the Gleanor at the time, although I resigned there, and it was the one who gave me a job, he used to guide me a lot. Mike Henry, again, in his own way. Um, and what had happened at the time, I'm trying to remember, I know his last name was Smith, and Ben Brody, and he's a well-known journalist. He's still around too. And it's not Fred Smith. Yeah, I don't know. Actually, I don't know why the name slips me now. But I remember when I was having a lot of problems, they would even come down and help me. And one of the things too that inspired me a lot was that Mr. Barrett, E.A. Barrett, who was the headmaster at Cornwall, was the same person who laughed at me when I said I wanted to be a journalist.
Yeah.
Why would you want to be a journalist? And I remember distinctly, he came to visit me one day when I was now at the Beacon, and he was quite impressed with my work. And he said how much he regretted what he said, and he can now see that I had a dream and so on. And I'll never forget, in those days, high polite type of society, he invited me to tea with his wife, which I felt very honored at the time. Coming from laughing at me, say I want to be a journalist, coming to commend me, and in fact, giving me the pleasure and privilege of having tea with him and his wife. That was a very memorable experience for me. And so I was at the Beacon as editor. Then the fireworks started. I wrote an editorial at the time, um, criticizing, it was then this guy, Spalding, who was one of the big JLP guys at the time. I don't know if you would have remembered him. There were two brothers of them. One was PMP and one was
Tony Spalding.
Tony Spalding was the PMP, and his brother was the JLP man at the time. I think he eventually ended up being Attorney General and Minister of National Security after they won in 1980. But prior to the elections, I wrote an editorial because he was touted to come and run in St. James, in fact, in East Central St. James. And I wrote an editorial questioning why would the GLP bring him down here to St. James? Is it likely that his coming may attract certain elements within his party who are known for violent intentions? Huh. I was sued for libel. And it became a big thing at the time. I remember there was this big headline, front page of the Star, where he was saying that when he's through with me, I would be nothing. And poor me now, little me now. I couldn't even afford a lawyer because the Beacon was literally going under. But I don't know where I got, and I think this is where now my whole community and advocacy and everything came to the fore, because I just decided I'm going to fight this thing, win, lose, or draw. So even though, I was pressured, I was threatened, gunmen threatened me that, must watch me back when me I go home because they're going to get me. I said, something, how dare you um, go after a man of the standing of Mr. Spalding? Are you crazy? And I said, I went through a lot. Whole heap at the time. I was ostracized. And but I stood my ground. I stood my ground. And I remember one of the things I did, I appealed to the community and said, well, I can't afford to you know, pay a lawyer to defend me. So, um, and I remember they decided they were going to put a huge drum in some sharp square. That time it was called Charles Square, I say. And the idea was people would drop money. And they said they were going to establish the defense fund to defend. And what that did for me is that it made me into a community hero because now all of a sudden the wider Montego Bay,
This
St.
is a
James
precursor.
community.
This is a precursor to crowdfunding. This is
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. Um, Galvanized and came around and they said, they say, I'm a beer boy, born a beer, you can't come from Kingston, you know? And that was where this whole thing about me and Montego Bay started to evolve. And well, eventually the libel suit didn't go anywhere at all. It was never taken to court for whatever reason. I know that there were some very influential people at the time who privately supported me and somehow persuaded him to drop. I don't know what happened, but the case was never taken to court. But by that time now, another side to the story now, and after that you can take me wherever you want to go. Um, the Beacon was in serious trouble because it was owned by an Englishman, a Ken Jones. Um, that was his desk sitting. That
Okay.
was his desk, and that was his. Those two pieces and these chairs over here were all part and parcel of his office at the time. Um, but things had got very bad for him, and he just one day, Michael Manley had said this famous speech in Sam Saab Square, 5 flights a day to Miami. So he took one of those flights and never came back. He literally abandoned the workers, of which I was one at the time. When he left Carla Riley in charge, but poor thing, she was leaning on me to assist her and blah, blah, blah. He had just, no, in addition to the Beacon, he was also publishing what was known as the Visitor Vacation Guide. And he also had a very nice little tourism guide called Focus on Jamaica. And he had bought through the Jamaica Development Bank loan this press, valued at the time at $250,000, which was a lot of money in those days. He had not been able to pay on his loan. And so we were still using the press. But one day, the Jamaica Development Bank, they sold the press to some foreign entity. And they just came in and uprooted the press.
So a newspaper without a press.
We didn't have no the printer. So we had to start paying to print the paper. But before that happened now, Carol O'Reilly, she was trying to run the business like a plantation. And the workers were very upset. So they decided they were going to strike. And I was the buffer between her and them. So I told her, look, you can't treat workers that way, honestly. But she was adamant, and eventually I had to side with the workers because I was a worker myself. So she too just disappeared, just left.
She take one of those flights as well.
Yes. So here we now have the Beacon newspaper, Beacon Publications is the name of the publishing company, with no director, no owner. They all just abandoned us, the workers, and Everything gone. So there was a Dennis Barton who was the main pressman, and he was close to Ken Jones. He claimed that Ken Jones had told him to take the business, but then he didn't do anything about it. He just sat there in his office looking totally lost and bewildered. Everything was crumbling. I went home, no salary, workers can't be paid. We were trying to print the paper at a certain place, and by the time we done print the paper, I had no money left to pay staff. So one day, one of the workers came to me and said, Mr. Smith, what are we going to do? Because this gentleman that Mr. Jones leave in charge not doing anything. What is going to happen? So I said, you know what? I tell you what you do. All of you come together and send me a letter asking me to take over. And that was what happened. I still have the letter. And I pulled together, we had a Mrs. Robinson who was the advertising manager, Miriam, who is still here up to this day, Michael Brand, still here up to this day. Mr. Barney eventually died a few years ago. Um, and I formed the company. We called it Western Publishers Limited because we could no longer use the beacon. And I came up with the name Western Mirror. And that was how we started. And when we started, no, we didn't have non-press. We had to be paying a printry, and it was very expensive at the time to use that method. So again, one day, this man, Gans Thompson, he's now dead, God rest his soul. He operated Speedy Prints, and it was one of the better known printers in Montego Bay. And he called me up and he said, Lloyd, I have a little old press that I have abandoned because I bought something bigger and new. Would you be interested to buy it um, to print your paper? I said, why not? But where am I going to get the money from? Poor me, where am I going to get the money from? So I said, how much you selling it for? I said, $30,000. No, in those days, $30,000. So by that time now, I was involved in theater. We have the Montego Bay Theater, Little Theater Movement, Fairfield Theater. And I was in a play called Dial M for Murder. And in that same play, I met Dunbar McFarlane, who was then the manager of NCB in Samsung Square. And I remember one night during rehearsals, we were sitting and talking, and he said, Lloyd, how is the beacon? How are you managing? I said, boy, things rough, because I tried getting some assistance to buy this little $30,000 press everywhere I go. As a matter of fact, I remember I went into Scotiabank at the time. Tony Linder was the manager, very good friend of mine. His wife adored me. So me thinks a man would have given me the loan. When I went into his office and I told him I wanted to borrow 30,000 because for the Beacon newspaper, he leaned back in his swivel chair and said, I'll never forget it. You want me to lend you 30,000 to buy this whole press? And he laughed. I felt so bad. Because you see, in those days, it was unthinkable for a black man to own and operate a newspaper. That was the reality. That's why he was laughing like that. Because first of all, his view is that there's no way it could be a profitable venture, right? So I'm not going to lend you money. You must be crazy. Go find something else to do. And I discussed it with Dunbar, God bless his soul. Dunbar, being a black man like me, he saw where I was going and said, Lloyd, come and see me. And I went. He almost lost his job and he never told me until long after. Because what had happened at the time that there was a group of bigwigs in the town who wanted to take the paper.
Okay.
But I was in their way. Because they couldn't manage me because by that time now, remember from that experience with Spalding and
Yeah.
my stature in the community had grown. I mean, this big boy, I mean, we are defending him at all costs. So it wouldn't have been easy for them to just throw me out. So when they found out eventually, Dunbar actually told me. He was one of the persons was on the NCB board at the time, and they reported him and wanted to fire him because how dare him lend LloydBSmith loan? Where him gonna get money to pay back for the loan? Anyway, Dunbar took the chance and he gave me the loan, $30,000 debenture. When the time come now to pay and to get the press, we were around an area called North Lane, somewhere across from Strand Theatre. I don't know how much you know, man.
Yeah. No strength.
And Speedy Print was on Market Street.
Still is.
Right. So after we pay the Thompson for the press, we now have no money for move the press from Market Street to North Lane. Or was it Church Lane? It could be Church Lane. I think it was Church Lane. And I'll never forget it. It was one of the most touching experiences in my life. The workers said, Mr. Smith, don't worry yourself, sir. You know what they did? They got a hand cart. It was a small press. They got a hand cart and they went to Speedy Prince and put the press on the hand cart and pushed it right through the streets of Montego Bay to Church Lane. It, up to this day, that press is downstairs right now as a monument put aside, but it's there. I'm not getting rid of it. It's part of the history.
Yeah, it is.
And that was how now we were able to start printing the paper for ourselves and being able to, make a little profit. And then now the next thing is that the poor workers, because we took over the company, we had to pay them up, and we also, in order to get supplies from the various people that Jones was dealing with, we had to end up paying them whatever was owed by the beacon. So we did as much as we could, and then eventually now, remember the bank had seized the press and sold it. They also decided to sell the property.
Okay.
So facing eviction, we had to move out. And so we eventually ended up at Westgate Plaza. That's where we actually started. And that was where the first issue, because we were still printing the beacon up to that time. So when we left Church Lane now and we went to, there was that little interim, because we had to stop using the name Beacon and Beacon Publications. We bought out a few things, as I said, like these pieces of furniture and some other things which we still have. And that was how we started out. And we went to Westgate Plaza, rented premises there from the car Jarrett. They owned Westgate Plaza. And we were there until 1986. That was 1980, 86. That was when we had Hurricane Gilbert.
In
Or was it
88.
88, sorry. And it blew us out. So we had to relocate because Westgate was damaged severely. And we ended up at Barnett Street after that, rented premises again. And then we said to ourselves, no, we can't continue like that. We have to try and see if we could get our own little place. And God helped us, the community helped us, supported us. And so we bought this land here, and again, we built from scratch because we didn't have enough money to build, or we were scared of going back to the bank to borrow. So we literally built this place from just what we earned as we went along. So it took us quite a while,
Wow.
quite a few years to complete this structure and everything. And yeah, we are here today, heading for 45 years.
Yeah.
Quite a story, isn't
That's great.
it?
You've been affectionately called the governor.
Yes.
Do you know where that nickname came from and how you feel about it?
Yeah, well, one of the things, I don't usually like to blow my own trumpet, but sometimes, unfortunately, I have to. And when I say that, I mean, I'm a what you call a multifaceted person. Because in addition to all that I've told you about myself, I became a talk show host. We have, at the time, it was first, we had what was called Radio West, which was, if you recall, I don't know if you would have recalled, there was a time when the media was being divested. I think it was Siaga who started the process. So he established regional stations. So you had one in Mandeville, one in Ocho Rios, and of course in Montego Bay. It was out of those three radio stations, for example, in Mandeville, Class was born out of that experience because it was eventually bought out. I can't remember the name of the people now. Similarly, IRA FM came about because it was Radio Northeast, and in Montego Bay it was Radio West. Radio West, and I was invited to be a talk show host. Eventually, Radio West became Radio Waves. Again, it was bought out by a private interest in Montego Bay. Eventually, it became Hot 102, and I was a talk show host. There was the Grapevine, and I was one of the hosts. And it became very popular locally. A lot of people listened in, and again, it sort of gave rise to my popularity with the community, blah, blah, blah. And I remember one day when I was on the program, there's this popular caller, Prince, he's now dead. But him used to call all the radio talk show hosts, from Mutty Perkins to Barbara Gludon to everybody, including myself, Prince. And one day I was on the program and he was asking me to do a number of things. This road to be fixed, that to be done, that to be done. And Mr. Smith, you are the man to get these things done, because they listen to you when you speak. I said, oh, come on, you can't be serious. Oh, you mean, sir? And then he said, oh, you mean, sir? You're the governor, you're the governor of Montego Bay. And the name just stuck from there.
So do you think it reflected your leadership style, or did you like the name?
Yeah, I tell you what, at first, I couldn't understand why. Because to me, governor had a certain colonial aspect to it. But then I realized that what it really represented was the fact that I stood up a lot for Montego Bay and Western Jamaica. Most of my articles at the time, for example, in addition to the Mirror, I had a column in the Observer. From that time when the Observer was started in '93 until now, I still write. But at the outset, it was Life in the West, and I was always there for Montego Bay in meetings on various platforms. I mean, I went out on a limb sometimes, get cussed and all sort of something. But I stood up for Montego Bay. And so the name just reverberated and got bigger and bigger and bigger until I can't escape it now. Everybody call me the governor. you know.
You've been a bold and fearless journalist. what made you start? But you went into the Western Mirror. So there was just a continuation of
Yes.
right. And you already explained what happened to the Beacon. What were some of the challenges running an independent newspaper?
Well, one of the first challenges is that there was a great deal of skepticism because, as I had mentioned earlier, it was felt that persons of my pigmentation and socioeconomic background could not run a newspaper successfully. Um, I must tell you that on a number of occasions I was approached by both the Gleaner and ultimately by the Observer to buy me out, which I refused. I said no. They even offered to take me on their staff if I came along with them, that sort of thing. I remember one time Oliver Clark flew me over to Kingston and had me in this boardroom with all these bigwigs, the private sector type people, moneyed people. And I told him no, although they wined and dined me. I remember Butch Stewart, when I was at Barney Street, he came. There was an article that I had written that upset him terribly. And then he came to see me, threatening to sue me. Um, and when he came and sat down in my little office at the time, the first thing he said as he sat down, you know, you're damn out of order writing such an article. How much you selling this place? I'm going to buy this blasted place. How much you want for it? And I looked him straight in the face and said, Mr. Stewart, neither me nor the Western World is for sale. From that day, Butch Stewart respect me, may I tell you. Anyway, he see me. If him there so, I mean the way down there so, as he see me, Lloyd, is that you? He respecting me. Can we stand up to
Stand
him?
up to him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stand up to him.
Was there ever a time you felt pressure to hold back a story? And if so, how did you handle it?
One of the most serious challenges I've faced over these many years is losing friendships, being ostracized in many instances because of the question you just asked. I had challenges dealing with that sort of situation. But I felt, I don't know, maybe it was, I got something from my mother because she was like that. Because I never yielded. I remember once I sent a reporter out to Half Moon. There was a very famous basketball player staying there. And he came to me and said he would love to go and interview him for the paper. I said, yes, why not? And he went, but he was treated very badly. First of all, they would not let him through the main entrance. He had to go through some little side entrance.
Yeah.
And he was treated very badly. And so I was very mad. And I wrote an editorial about what seems to be, excuse me, practices of racism at the Half Moon. The first thing that Half Moon did, they pulled their ads out of the paper. And it got such a stink. And then the Gleaner and the other paper, the media, public media, took it up, you know. And I remember Maurice Cargill at the time wrote an article about it. And what happened is that the Half Moon, in order to counter what happened, because I wrote a scathing editorial, because they had this black, Half Moon used black and white colors.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was coincidental or what, but the black gate is where the workers and the black people would. I may even mention that in me. I say, is this symbolic of plantation? Whatever, whatever. And boy, I went through hell. And then um, Half Moon went ahead, man, and invited all the media houses except me, all the journalists, for a weekend at the Half Moon to come and show them that there was no such thing going on at the hotel. No. We stand my ground, and then I tell you something. What I did, a certain article came out chastising me, and the article was written by a very good journalist friend of mine, and I was shocked. I said, how could he do this to me? And a lady friend of mine who worked in a certain bank called me one day privately and said, Lloyd, I'm looking at a check here, you know, that the Half Moon paid a fellow journalist of mine to write that scathing story on me, to discredit me. I said, wow. I tell you something, my friend. I never lost ground. I never gave up. Heinz Simonish is now dead. God rest his soul. Eventually, when he couldn't defeat me, years after, because we would meet at cocktail parties and different functions and so on, and I still held my ground. And one day I went by the Half Moon, and when I was there, I looked around and I saw where he had this very interesting program at the time. It was in those early days when this whole thing about climate change and developing the green environment was taking root. And he had done a splendid job, I must say, in converting the entire environment of the Half Moon as a green space. And so when I saw that, I wrote an article commending the Half Moon. But I didn't do it to get any accolades or any bribes or anything. I just did it as a journalist, objective. This is worthy of, and leave it there. So, to my surprise, one day his secretary called, Mr. Smith, Mr. Simonish has asked me to invite you for a weekend at the Half Moon with your family, and he wishes to stress that there are no strings attached. I said to her, are you sure? She said, oh, yes, Mr. Smith, I'm very sure. I said, okay, I will think about it. And I didn't want to be mean spirited. So I said it to my wife and my two kids. And they said, why not? Let's go. And to my surprise, you know where he put me up? In what is known as the Imperial Suite. Queen, presidents, those are the people. Eddie Murphy, all the big Hollywood star when they come, he's a whole suite by itself.
But this shows the same thing like with Butch Stewart. It
Yeah.
shows a sort of, he earned a sort of respect for you, for your
Yes.
studio grounds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you show that you were objective because without him
And that's
paying
what he
anything,
yes.
you wrote a.
That's what he said. He said, you know, I didn't pay you to do anything, and yet you went and did it. And yeah. So I went and had a fun. My kids loved it. So, you know, these are some of the experiences I've had, which, based on the question that you asked, that it hasn't been easy for me. I've been subject to all kinds of, you know, hate mail and disparaging comments, and it's not been, you know, an easy ride. But my friend, again, I go back. My mother worked for the aristocracy as a cook, and one of the things she always said to me is when she worked for them, they don't mess with her because I remember one instance, she told me that she was there working and something happened and she just packed up her things and told them off and left because she said, look, I have my dignity and I will not allow myself to in any way treated otherwise by you people, not because you are what you are and I am what I am. And that sort of thing instilled in me that although I'm black, although I come from a poor, humble background, you're not going to trample me and step over
Yeah.
me. But Stuart, we became very good friends. I mean, Lord have mercy. Anyway, what happened? And Simonich, and there are many other cases like those I could tell you where, because I stood my ground, I can tell you quite honestly, I've never accepted a bribe. I've never allowed myself to be compromised. As a matter of fact, a good friend of mine said to me some years ago, but Lloyd, you could be very rich and you could have reached further in this thing, you know. I said, but no, my integrity comes first, you know. And it took me over into the politics because that was one of the reasons why I went into the politics
That's
and
just
left it.
that's just what I was about to ask. I say after years of holding politicians accountable through journalism, what made you take the leap into politics yourself?
Well, to some extent, it was a natural progression in that I've always seen myself as an advocate. And politics, as you know, to some extent, especially representational politics, is about advocacy.
Yeah.
And being the governor, which I gained that title by virtue of my advocacy, I felt that the next step would be perhaps people representation. And I must tell you that it was two times that I entered into the political arena. And the first time was on a JLP ticket. And how that came about is that Ed Bartlett, my very good friend and still is, um, he approached me out of the blue one day and said, Lord, why you not decide and try out this political thing? And he was my very good friend at the time. And as a matter of fact, I taught him at STETS. I did a brief stint at STETS when I was at college. And we developed a very, I saw in him leadership qualities at the time. And even from that early stage, I was encouraging him to, go into public service. And so here we are now, and he's in politics full time. I'm in journalism full time. And we were talking one day, and he said, Lloyd, why you don't try this thing? So I said, I don't know, you know. He said, no, but you're an ideal candidate because you have a very good public record, etc. So I thought about it, and at the time, South St. James, the Labour Party needed a candidate urgently. They had a little Chinese man in there who could hardly speak English. I don't know why they were using him to begin with. But what I had gathered is that he had a lot of money. So they were leveraging that.
Yeah.
But they realized that there was no way that he could win because he could hardly speak English. Anyway, so I was there thinking about at that time now, I was president of the Montego Bay Chamber of Commerce and Industry. There's this plaque right behind me here. And I said, but why, if I'm going to run, I would have to give up my presidency. And he really pushed me. And then I remember one day I was going to a meeting at Rose Hall. It was then the Rose Hall Intercontinental Hotel. It's now Hilton Resort. And I was also the chairman of the Cruise Shipping Council. There's so many things I was involved in. And as I was entering the lobby of the hotel, Noel slowly, who's on the other side of the fence, politically, PNP man, approached me and he, in a most, almost violent manner, and said to me, Lloyd, I understand that you are going to be running for the JLP and that you have been paid $300,000 to do so. I said, are you damn crazy? I have never been and will never be for sale. How dare you say that to me? Well, that's what I've been told. And when I thought, because up to that point, I wasn't overly excited about running.
Mhm.
But when this man approached me like that and said that to me, I was so caught up about it. I said, all right, if that's how you look at it, I'm going to run. And I'm not running because I'm not getting one red cent from anybody. I'm going to just run on a matter of principle. And I was being realistic because I didn't think I could win. Because this is about 3 weeks before the election, right? There's no way I could go in there. And then Keller, who was the incumbent, was a seasoned politician. And I said I would just go in for the experience and the fun of it, quite frankly. I remember I went down to a meeting and Siaga called me and thanked me for deciding to run. And I ran. And this was 1997. Of course, the JLP lost. And I lost too. But interestingly, in that brief 2 weeks, I did extremely well. Everybody was surprised. I said, but Lloyd, if you had been in there long enough, you would have won.
You want to see it, yeah.
In 2 weeks, they have this thing, you have to get a certain percentage of votes for you to get back your deposit. And I went over that. So there it was. I did very well. And that was history. I just did it and then I forgot it after that. I said, no, I'm not going to. And then I was exposed to certain aspects of the politics. I remember when I was in a certain town, I think it was Maroon Town, and a group of guys came up to me, drove up in a car, and they called me aside and said, boss, we are here to support you, but you see, you have to set us up, just get us a house, buy up some flour and food, and take care of me, and we will take care of you. You know what that means?
Yeah, that's
And I looked at them and I said, look, you're barking up the wrong tree.
was this because you went this before you went to run for the PNP?
Yes, that
Okay.
was 97.
That's not-
Because
okay.
I ran for the PNP in 2011.
Okay.
I said, no, I can't do that. And they were so annoyed that when they were walking, I went, so, I said, no, I wasn't going to. You see what I'm saying? So, I don't want to come across pompous or self-righteous, but that is me. I cannot sacrifice my integrity. Can't. I can't. And that was one of the reasons why when I ran for the PMP and won, I left it because of a similar situation. Because in 2011, why I decided to run again, Portia Simpson at the time, who I liked very much and admired as a person, she invited me one time to her office in Kingston. That time she was the leader of the opposition. And she said, Lloyd, I would love you to run in St. James. There was this new constituency created, St. James Central, brand new constituency. And she would love me to run. I said, boy, I'm not really into this thing. And I said, no, man. And she had me there for about 2.5 hours. These love seats.
Yeah.
Me and she sitting on this love seat. And for 2.5 hours, she held my hand and she told me her life story and she did everything to convince me to run. You know the power of a woman. And so I had to say yes. And I remember when I was leaving, Tony Hilton, one of her parliamentarians, came in and he saw me and said, wait, Lloyd, I understand you're going to be running for the PMP, man, to represent the PMP. And that was when my respect for Portia grew even more so because she said, no, 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 I'm not just coming to run for non-PMP, he's coming to represent his people. And it touched me deeply. That it made me more willing to go and run. It was a seat that was cut to be won by the JLP. So it wasn't felt that I could win it. But I knew I could win it. Why? Again, being a product of Montego Bay, everybody knew me. They knew my parents. They knew where I grew up.
And you're the governor.
Yes. And we have maybe over 30, 40 odd newspaper vendors who come from the inner city areas who all depend on selling the paper. You think they would betray me? So, I mean, and I was the governor, so I knew within myself. Because even within the PMP at the time, I remember I went to a meeting in Sablama, Region 6 meeting, and there was this tremendous skepticism that I could never win the seat. And I stood up and said, don't you worry, I'm going to win the seat. And I won. I remember when I was in Parliament, one of the times, Carl Samuda, one of the JLP bigwigs, he said, Lloyd, you know, I have to commend you because he was the General Secretary at the time for the JLP, and he said, I personally sat down with me and my colleagues, and we cut the boundaries in such a way that the JLP had to win and must win, and you come and win, you know. So here I was now, and why I had up to this day, and as I said, I don't like to blow my own trumpet, but I was a damn good MP, very good MP. I did a lot of things, and why I left it, I could have stayed there, and if I'd stayed there, I would be MP today. I can tell you that because even the EY Clark, the JLP man who is there now, will tell you that the only person who can beat him tomorrow morning is me. But when I was in there, the ugly side of the politics began to emerge, which I couldn't deal with. I remember things like this poor little old lady could barely walk into my office. I used to be at my office I told them, I don't want any of them come here to my mirror office, which they didn't like. I said, this is my business, and my business, I have to deal with JLP supporters, PMP supporters, and the wider public. I can't have you coming here to disrupt that process. I have an office elsewhere where you can come and see. And I remember I went to the office. I normally go there on a Friday. And I was there this particular day. And would you believe this old woman came in? And the first thing that all these PMP supporters shouted was, Mr. MP, do have nothing to do with that. So I say, oh, labor, it makes you come out. No, you have nothing. But what I normally would do when they come in, I assist them. I assist people. Not handouts, but if they, for example, some of them, they might need a little zinc for the house, or, you know, they want to start a little business, I give them a startup and so on. And I got up and I said, no, 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 no. And I sat her down and I said, she's staying here. And I'm going to assist her if I can. They didn't like that. The straw that broke the camel back for me when I decided, I said, I'm not going to continue in this thing, because that's not me. The Keller, who is the Minister of Social Security, called me and said, Lloyd, I'm going to allocate a certain amount of money to you to assist the most needy people in your constituency. You determine how you apportion it, etc., etc. Me now being the type of person that I am, I could do it all by myself. But I said, no, I have three counselors. Is it three or four? It was Salt Spring, Rose Heights. Yeah. No, it's four counselors. So I called in the four counselors and said, look, I have this amount of money and I'm going to apportion it to each of you And what you're going to do is identify X number of persons in the constituency for assistance. One day the constituency secretary called me and said, Mr. Smith, what is this? I can't handle this one. That's what you're talking about. One particular councillor. You know who he had on his list? His wife's mother, his sweetheart, and I could go on. All people, none of whom really deserve to get any benefits. I'll never forget. This very office, I summoned him to my office here and sat him down. And I said, what is the meaning of this? And you know what he said to me? They put it plain like how he said it. You're Jamaican, you must understand him language. Lord, Mr. MP, you know, sir, so this thing go. I said, really? And in the back of my mind, I decided to start packing up. I said, no, sir, I'm not staying in this thing. If I saw it go.
Corrupt.
I'm not staying in this thing. And a lot of other things happened which I wasn't prepared to go along with. Outright skullduggery, outright corruption, using public funds in all sorts of ways. And I couldn't deal with it. And after a while, when they realized that I was not prepared to do those things, they started to fight against me. And I decided quietly that I was going to leave the politics. They got in a little young miss, ostensibly to overthrow me, but I quit preemptively because I saw what was coming. Because I remember when they were going to have a selection as to who should succeed me, I was still being asked, even by Portia herself, begging me, please reconsider. We'll support you, blah, blah, blah. One of the persons who supported come and said to me, Mr. Smith, don't go near there. The day of the selection process, gunmen were brought in from Kingston.
Intention to get you.
So I just quietly left. If the PMP, and I'm telling you this without any hesitation, and you can quote me anywhere because it's a fact, if the PMP had not allowed that foolishness to go on, they would have won that election. The JLP won by 1 seat. I would have kept my seat, and the PMP would therefore have been in power. And they know it up to this day. They know it.
What would you say is your proudest achievement as an MP?
Well, first of all, that I was able to convince a lot of the constituents that politics ought not to be about corruption. It ought not to be about, just getting handouts, because I made a fiery speech at my first conference that I'm not into the licky licky yummy yummy mentality. And some people say you're mad. You're not going to stay there long when you say that. But there were a lot of people who followed me, and I did a lot in education. Education was one of my major emphases, and so I helped the schools a lot. And one of my proudest achievements is that I had always been advocating for Montego Bay to have a cultural center. And right now it does have a cultural center, which I engineered in the old courthouse building. If you go there, you'll see it.
Yeah, been there. Yeah.
That was my dream. It became a reality under my leadership. I got the necessary people together, everything. And then I went into the background, because you have to know politics, right? Because especially with the change of government, if I were still upfronting it,
close
it would have been sabotage.
Yeah.
So I deliberately got somebody who had nothing to do with politics, Joseph Fortsmeyer, the managing director at Roundale, to chair it. And I pulled myself out quietly. I'm still a director, Mark, but I don't upfront myself because I didn't want it to be killed. And it is still there, doing very well as a cultural center. Right? That, to me, is one of my finest achievements as an MP. Um, a lot of benefits came to the people. A lot of roads were fixed. All sorts of things happened. And you can go out there and walk the constituency and ask people, they will tell you. Because to this day, if I were to go back there, I would win back.
You win again.
Hmm.
Politics is a brutal.
It is. It is.
What was the hardest lesson you learned during your time in office?
In politics? That people will betray you just for what they themselves personally can acquire. They sacrifice personal aggrandizement on the altar of loyalty. They prefer to get what they want, even if it means stabbing you in the back. And that hurt me a lot. I couldn't deal with that. I couldn't deal with that. When that counselor tell me, MP, you know, so I saw this thing go, I realized what I was getting into, and that this politics thing is about just manipulating and using people. And I couldn't be a part of that. I'm sorry. And I'm happy I came out of it. And I came out of it with my integrity. You will never go anywhere and hear that I was a corrupt politician or that I was involved in any acts of corruption. None. Even my greatest detractors would never tell you that.
Looking back, do you feel you made a bigger impact as a journalist or a politician?
Lord have mercy, that is a tricky question. I think in terms of chronology, if you look at my years as a journalist, I would have to put journalism as, because I'm planning to write my memoirs. In fact, the title will be In the Belly of the Beast. And memoirs of a political journalist. Because if you think about it, you know, it is such a, and that's another thing I'm very proud of. When I was in the politics, my newspaper was never and could never have been accused of being partial. I deliberately pulled myself out of the editorial chair and had my staff. I still managed the company's affairs, but I did not in any way seek to influence any editorial decisions. It wasn't easy, you know, because, for example, when I was MP, the PMP wanted me to use the paper to push their agendas, and I didn't. And they didn't like me for that. But I was not prepared to sacrifice my journalism integrity. I would be nobody would respect me today in journalism if I had gone that route. Never. So I've done a lot of foolish things, like talking about integrity and standing up for probity. But I'm still happy for it.
Beyond media and politics, you've been deeply involved in the community initiatives. What drives your passion for service?
Basically, it's, as I said, it stemmed from my early upbringing. My mother was a very caring sort of person who always looked out for the people in her community. And she would just feed people, she would care for them, she would counsel them, she would stand up for them. And somehow that in my early years influenced me a lot in terms of which direction I should go as an individual. Um, you know, and most importantly, self respect. As I said, she was a poor woman, but she had this, you couldn't manage her. Even when she worked for these people in the higher echelons of society, they had to respect her now because she put her foot down and said, look, not because of so and so, but this, you know. And I copied all of that to a large extent, and you know, I think this is the genesis of who I am today. This strength of character and the unwillingness to be bought or sold or to be manipulated by whatever forces there, whether it be a Butch Stewart or Oliver Clark or Edward Seaga. I was always independent and stood my ground. It may not have made me a very rich man, but it has made me a happy man.
Rich in a different respect, really.
Hmm?
It's a rich in a different respect.
Yes, yes. And I'm proud of that fact, if I may say so myself.
Now, you have sponsored football leagues, supported mental health initiatives, and served as a justice of the peace. Which of these roles has been most fulfilling for you?
I sponsored a football competition for over 30 odd years in the community of Irwin, where I was from, which I told you earlier, that's where I grew up. And up to this day, the youngsters, many of them are now adults, talk about that competition and how much it meant to them. It brought about a great deal of community, unity, and togetherness. Every Sunday afternoon, old, young, everybody would head towards the football field. There's this camaraderie and everything. And to have got it going for 30 years, and it could have gone on longer. But unfortunately, I had left the area, and to some extent also, the whole social fabric of the society had begun to change at that time. I mean, people were now turning up at football matches with guns in their waist and machetes under their shirts.
Yeah, that defeats the
Violence.
Yeah.
You know. But I would say that that competition stood out a lot for me. Being a justice of the peace, I primarily just counseled people and offered my services to them in terms of, what a justice of the peace.
Yeah.
But I would put that football thing because, as I said, up to this day, I go to a lot of places and these men come up to me. They are big men who say, "Boy, Mr. Smith, you know, we used to love, it meant so much to them." Mm.
No, you were awarded Order of Distinction in 2022.
Yes.
What did that moment mean to you?
Vindication. And I tell you why, I'll never forget. And I've said this to a lot of people. Maybe you're about the third person. After I was presented with the award, and the Prime Minister and his wife were moving around, meeting and greeting. And when he came to me, he pulled me aside and he said, "Lloyd, a lot of my colleagues didn't want me to approve your getting it, because of how you criticize me and the party and etc. etc. But you deserve it."
That was
Wholeness.
just wholeness.
Yes. Yes. And that's why I say vindication, because if I had got it under a PMP administration, you would say, "Oh, well, it's a PMP man, so I get it." But I got it under a JLP administration.
Yeah.
And the JLP Prime Minister man said to me, a lot of my colleagues didn't want me to approve it because, in my writings, I'm very critical of, But so for me, it was vindication. There was because for years people kept coming to me and say, "Lloyd, how come you don't get a national award? I mean, look how many people I see getting award and you don't get one. What's the problem?" I said, "It's all right, don't worry yourself." I used to say to them, there was a quotation I came across. It is better not to get an award that you deserve than to get one that you do not deserve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yes. So it was vindication for me.
Many people see you as a mentor figure. What advice would you give to a young journalist or a future leader?
You have to be strong in character, and to achieve that, you have to know who you are. And part of that knowing of who you are is that you must have a sense of history. Unfortunately, a lot of our young people do not have a sense of history. They don't know who they are. There's no they don't have an identity of themselves. They're I've I mean you see this bleaching thing that is
Yeah.
going on. A lot of our young people do not respect themselves. They do not love themselves because deep down there's this inferiority complex. What has enabled me to be what I am today is that I did not give in to feeling that I was any less of a human being than anybody. Be it Mr. Big Up It Up, and also humility. I often said to people who are mentored that there's a difference between being aggressive and being assertive. We as Jamaicans tend to be very aggressive. Move your word. Oh, you know me. Oh, you this aggression.
Yeah.
The other approach is to be assertive, to be quietly, firmly put your position forward and maintain it. Right? And unfortunately, a lot of our young people are not like that. They don't see that as the way to go. They feel that to be aggressive is the way to be. And so we have this great deal of violence, violence to solve as many problems as may arise. And it doesn't work in the long run because violence begets violence.
Yep, in the end. Now, you've worn many hats in your lifetime: journalist, politician, community leader. How do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as someone who loved this community and who loved serving that community. Service is the ultimate, thing to me. I, 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 I take joy in knowing that I was able to accomplish so many things, which in the final analysis made people happy, made people feel good about themselves. Most of the years that I have been involved in the very final analysis, have been things that make people feel better about themselves, more respectful of themselves and those around them and their community, self actualization, self worth. Those are some of the things that I want to be remembered for, not so much the fact that I have all these accolades, because sometimes I wonder, people say, well, how you come you do so many things? I mean, I don't know if you even are aware. I mean, I was also very involved in theater.
Yes, you mentioned that earlier as well, yeah.
To the extent where I was the first person outside of Kingston to win the Actor Boy Award for Best Actor in a Leading Role. I mean, the year when I won, I was up against people like Oliver Samuel and all the big wigs in Kingston. And here was this guy coming out of Montego Bay walking away with the Oscar. So I like to make people feel good about themselves. I like to see people become, somebody, which is people wonder how comes I've had this establishment for so long. Most of my workers here have been with me for years.
Yeah, from the days of the Beacon.
From the days of the beginning, I have people here working. We are now going to be 45 in October, and I have people here working right now who have been here for the 45 years. I do have a rapid staff turnover, and I'm not able to pay the best and most attractive salaries. But I create an environment in which people feel that they are respected. I use emotional intelligence. I respect them, they respect me. I give them a sense of purpose, and I create a family environment, and it works. It works,
Is there anything you still want to accomplish that you haven't yet?
Yes. My wife keeps telling me every day, my son, Dad, you need to write. My experiences have been so varied, and they say, look, you need to write a few books before you depart this life. They have been at me over and over. Everywhere I go nowadays, say, by the way, Lloyd, have you written that book yet? So that that is what is my major focus right now. I would like to achieve if the good Lord decides to extend my existence on planet Earth.
That's a good goal. If you could sit down with a younger self, with your younger self,
Yeah.
what would you tell him?
You know, there are so many platitudinous expressions you could use, like never give up, respect yourself, stay focused. But then they're all true. Yes, never give up. I've been through hell and powder house, you know. I'm sitting here in this nice little office and I have food on my table. I have somewhere to live, but it wasn't always, as I mentioned to you earlier, with the whole experience with the beacon. I went home many weeks without salary after the staff was paid. I've known what it is to suffer. I've known what it is to be ostracized, to be disliked, because I take certain unpopular stances. I've taken on issues in Montego Bay with other people, did not want to go nearby. I don't know if you remember the street people issue when all those so-called mad people were scraped up off the streets of Montego Bay and dumped by a mud lake. Up and I was a whistleblower, they said. And even some of my best friends at the time had nothing to do with me. They ostracized me, they cursed me. Oh dear me, you know, because I saw what had happened. Because what had happened is that there was a major international conference to be held in Montego Bay. And a lot of the meetings were going to be held down by the free zone area. And so it was a G5 summit, I think. And so the people would have to pass through downtown Montego Bay, more so Sam Sharp Square. And there were all these street people down there, the mad people, disheveled, dirty. So somebody got the fantastic idea to scrape up all of them and get rid of them. And nobody wanted to speak as to who did it and why it was done. And they had an inquiry, a commission of inquiry, and I was being cross-examined, and I just laid it bare. I mean, I didn't know how I survived. I mean, even some of my closest friends in the chamber, some of them looked like they were going to have a heart attack. But I felt I had to tell the truth. There's no way I could hide it. Because some of those people are some of the people I know. And they know me too, you know, when they see me. Well, Mr. Smith, in their worst state, then you still know me. There was a particular guy, we went to school together. He was doing very well, but he started taking drugs and went cuckoo after a while and was a street person. He was among those who was carted off in this most ignominious way in the back of a truck, dump truck, garbage truck, and taken all the way to St. Elizabeth, left beside a mud lake in the middle of the night. If they walked straight, they could have ended up in the mud lake, and the mud lake is acidic. They would have been burnt and killed, perhaps. So those are, you know, and some issues I have fought and lost, like this sewage pan out by Fairview Day. I was totally, and I'm still against it. I do not think you should have used up such valuable urban space, land, to put a sewage pond.
They're now regretting that and want to move it.
Yes. I fought it tooth and nail, and I lost. Because, you know, I was heavily involved in the chamber at the time. I served about twice or three times as president of the chamber, and I really stood up for those things, and I lost. So it's not, I didn't win every time.
Yeah.
There were times when I would have lost the battle, but not the war.
So what's next for Lloyd B. Smith? Are you stepping back, or should we expect the governor to make a next big move?
Well, This year I'll be 78, so there comes a time when you have to begin to think about riding off into the sunset. But for me, rest is rust. So I intend to go on and on and on and on until I can't go any further. As I had mentioned to you, I'm refocusing. One of the things I would like to do is to establish what I call the Sam Sharp Institute of Public Affairs and Caribbean Thought. Um, I've always felt, and that's one thing I keep saying about Montego Bay, and some people cuss me, so they don't know what I'm talking about. I've kept saying that there is a lack of intellectual depth in the city. It's all about the cash register, it's all about making money. But a city has to have something more than just that. You need to have the cultural arts.
We talk about this you mentioned the little theatre, the
Yes,
Fairfield Theatre
which
thing,
has died now,
and yes, and there's nothing here
There's
really.
nothing to replace it. We don't even have a theatre in Montego Bay right now. If I had not done what I did, we wouldn't even have the little cultural centre in Sam Sharp Square. And those are some of the things that I still want to push as much as I can. The problem is that in Jamaica, politics interferes with every aspect of community life. So you start to do something and you start to wonder, is he a PMP man? Is he a JLP man? Is the PMP going to benefit? Is the JLP going to benefit? Without realizing that what we're talking about is for the people to benefit.
Yeah.
So that is part of my problem, because I work right across the board. I don't see people as PMP or JLP or no PMP. I just see people as people, but we still have that problem. This year, I'm taking a back seat for a while until after the elections. um, I am frequently asked, because I do political analysis. I'm referred to as a political analyst and commentator, and so practically ever so often I'm called upon, whether it is on TV or radio or in the newspaper, to comment on these issues. Um, I have to be careful now in this political season, because you have to be literally trying to walk through the raindrops, because you say something and it sounds like it's supporting one party or the other party. Well, I don't care. If the thing is wrong, I'm going to say it is wrong. And I will stand by what I say and take the flak when it comes. But I still want to, as apart from writing my books, I still want to serve the community in any way possible that I can through this Sam Sharp Institute of Public Affairs and Cabinet Thought. I want to hook that up with one of the universities locally and see how best we can get some things done there. Um, you know, Outside of that, I'm not going to go back into politics for sure. That is out of the question. Because even at my old age now, they keep coming to me, asking me to, why don't you get involved with this, that? No. I'm not going back that route.
Finally, if you had to sum up your life's journey in one sentence,
My God.
what would it be?
It matters not how long you live, but how.
That's very positive. I like that. Mr. Lloyd B. Smith, the governor, it's been an absolute honor having you talk to Miguel today. Your journey from fearless journalism, your public service and community leadership is truly inspiring. Thank you for sharing your story and your insights, your wisdom with us. To our viewers, if you enjoyed this conversation and you want to hear more powerful stories from game chambers like Mr. Smith, don't forget to share the video, like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Once again, Mr. Smith, thank you for being with us today. And I hope all of you watching stay curious, stay engaged, And we'll see you again in the next episode of Talk to
And I
Miguel.
wish you all the very best in your endeavors.